business.
All right. Thank you, Marion. So, there are really three types of home businesses. We have an exempt home business, a minor home business, and a major home business. And you need a home business if you use an accessory structure, you have more than 2 employees, you have on-site customers coming, you have outdoor storage, heavy equipment, more than 1 related home business vehicle, and on-site sales. You don't need a permit if the following, and this is the exempt part, which you do not need a permit for. You don't use any accessory structure, which is a garage or shop in the urban area. You use up to 400 square feet of a shop or garage in the rural area. You have 2 employees or less. You have no on-site customers, no outdoor storage. You don't have the heavy equipment, and you only have 1 home business related vehicle, and you conduct no on-site retail sales.
Yes, and all you need to do is email us, contact us at landuse@clark.wa.gov. Just give us your address or parcel number and a quick rundown of what your business entails or what you'd like to propose as a business, and we can dig into the code and let you know if it sounds like it would be exempt or if further review might be required.
All right, so the general standards for all home businesses, major or minor, rural or urban, is you have to live on the site. That's a requirement. You have more than one home business. More than one home businesses are allowed on a site if you can meet all the requirements. You're limited to 25% or 1,000 square feet of gross floor area of your dwelling, whichever is less. Now, prohibited uses for a home business, you can't have any on-site retail sales other than incidental retail sales. And a good example of that is if you have a barber shop or a beauty salon that you're running from your home, if you're selling shampoo, that would be an example of incidental retail sales. You can't have adult entertainment uses or automotive recyclable material facilities or any new facilities serving motor vehicles servicing in the urban areas. The other thing that's not permitted in a home business are uses that are allowed in the underlining zone, and we'll cover that next. So if you look up at the screen, we have table 4210-050-1. These are the uses for the rural commercial 1, CR1, and CR2 zones. And if you look in the middle of the table here in the pink, you'll see that a barber and beauty shops are permitted in both the CR1 and the CR2 zone, which means they are not allowable for a home business because they are allowed in the zone. And really what that means is if you had a property in those zones, you could set up a real business. You could set up a business, get a building permit, get a land use permit for that. But it would not be allowable as a home business. Okay, different types of home businesses. In the urban zones, we have the minor and the major that require permits. And you can qualify for a minor home business if you use up to 400 square foot of an accessory structure, which is like a garage or a shop. You have 2 employees, a maximum of 2 employees, a maximum of 6 customers a day, no outdoor storage, no heavy equipment, only 1 related home business vehicle, and the hours of operation are 7 a.m. To 8 p.m. Now, you'll see the hours of operation a couple more times in these upcoming slides. They're all the same. It's 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And incidental retail sales only. So, as we've talked about before, that's the only type of retail sales you can have in a home business. Now, for major home businesses in the urban zone, you can have a maximum of 900 square feet of an accessory structure, which is like we said, shop or garage. You can have a maximum of 3 employees, 12 customers a day, no outdoor storage, no heavy equipment, kind of similar to the minor. Those are only allowed in major rural home businesses. We'll get to that a little bit later. You can also have a maximum of 3 home business related vehicles. Again, we have the same hours of operation, and also incidental retail sales only. Now, the other item for a major home business is it has to be sited on a lot that is at least 10,000 square feet in size. Now, for rural home businesses, again, we have the minor and the major. You can qualify for a minor home business in the rural area if you have up to 1,000 square feet of the accessory structure. 3 employees, a maximum of 6 customers a day, and like the others, no outdoor storage. You can have 2 pieces of heavy equipment, 2 related home business vehicles, and of course the same hours of operation and the incidental retail sales. Rural major gets a little bit different. Now, the rural major home businesses, the requirements and the standards are based upon the size of your property, the size of the lot that you live on. In this case, we're using an example size of 2.5 acres. We'll look at the different options for the different sizes of the parcel on the next screen. But based on 2.5 acres, you can have a maximum of 2,500 square feet of an accessory structure, a maximum of 4 employees, 4,000 square feet of an activity area. We'll get more into the activity area in a minute. Also, you can have 6 customers a day as an average. That can go up as you get higher lot sizes in the rural major. There's no limit to heavy equipment, no limit to home business related vehicles, and of course the same hours of operation and the limit of only incidental retail sales.
Yes, and something that we think is important to point out here is you're not allowed to have outside storage if it's an urban zone or if it's a minor rural home business. So the only time you're allowed to have outside storage is a rural major home business. And we get a lot of questions about that. There's that expectation that people have a lot of times that they can have outside storage. So just something to point out there, rural major is the only time that you can have outside storage, which is your activity area.
Great. And here is the table. It's 4260-100-1. That's only for rural major home businesses. As you can see on this table, that top row talks about the lot sizes. The first column is 2.5 to 5 acres, 5 to 7.5, 7.5 to 10. That goes up all the way to 20. And as you notice, the limits increase as you get up into your lot size. On the first the row under the lot size, you'll see it's the accessory structure, how much of an accessory structure you can use. You got 2,500, 3,000 for 5 acres to 7.5 acres, and of course that goes all the way up to 5,000 square feet if you are equal to or over 20 acres. Maximum number of employees, very similar situation. It gets up, you have 4, and that can go all the way up to 6.
Perfect, thanks Richard. So moving on to the activity area that I was talking about, you can see the row below where he was speaking about the employee number gives you the maximum activity area. So minimum acre of a 2.5 acre parcel, you're gonna have a 4,000 square foot activity area. So that's your outside storage, that's your parking of heavy equipment, whatever else you need to be outdoor. And of course it goes up based on parcel size, so it becomes 2%. So of course if you have a very large parcel, you're gonna have more room outside to work with. And then under that row, you'll see no limit across the board for 3 different rows, right? So you have maximum number of vehicles, maximum number of trailers, maximum number of pieces of heavy equipment, all no limit, which can be misleading if you don't notice the footnote 5, which is there, which states that those items must be kept within the landscaped screened activity area. So you're not limited to a number of vehicles or trailers, but you're limited to that activity area, which again is based on parcel size.
Yeah, and it's interesting because recently I had a question about that very same thing about that activity area. Somebody wanted to do a truck driving school Well, and of course, if you route out all where they wanted the truck to be driving, they were never going to fit it into 2% of the site. So
Yes, it can be very constricting if you don't realize that you're going to be limited to that.
Yep.
Absolutely. And then real quick, just that bottom row there shows maximum average number of customer round trips per day. So again, starting at minimum of at least 6, and then can go up to 12 based on parcel size.
All right, so the different types of reviews, we're talking about the timeline and the costs for minor versus major. A minor home business is a type 1 review, and that starts, after you submit, that starts with a 21-day fully complete review. Staff will review it, and we need to make sure that we have everything there to successfully complete the review of the project. Once you get a fully complete determination, a completeness check, then we have a 21-day review time for the approved decision, for the approval of the decision. Now that differs from a major home business because we now require pre-application conferences for a major home business, when we didn't have that requirement before. Major home business, of course, is a type 2 review, and that pre-application conference occurs before you submit for the type 2 review. Now, the type 2 review, similarly to the minor home business, we do have a fully complete review, which is roughly 21 days. Now, that can be extended if we ask for more information, and it takes a little while to submit those. That can extend the timeline a little bit. But again, it's still that 21 fully complete review. And another difference for the major versus the minor is we also have an early issue review that we do for all type 2s and type 3 reviews. And essentially, staff wants to go through the project, through the application submittals, and just make sure that there is no big ticket items that could cause a holdup or potentially not approval. We want to get that information to the applicant so then they can resubmit it. And it's a good thing that we've implemented having the early issue review. It really helps the applicant. And the major home business review timeline is 78 days from the fully complete decision to when we issue a decision.
Perfect. And we also wanted to include kind of a rough estimate of what you'd be looking at for fees. And of course, it's going to vary depending on what your business is. So for a minor type 1, that 431 amount is just your base engineering fee and your base planning fee. That doesn't include fire marshal or anything additional. The engineering fee is going to be based on their hourly rate, so however long they worked on the project. So if it's a very basic minor type 1, not a lot of time spent by staff, it was pretty quick review, you could be looking at, around 431 would be like the absolute minimum. Of course, from there it goes up. Once you need a fire marshal review, maybe you're proposing a new structure, other things. The CARA review could be part of it. So if you're within a critical aquifer recharge area, and if you're proposing certain activities, then another CARA review could be triggered. So that would be wrapped up into that higher amount there. And of course, the plus sign is there because the time the engineering spends can also increase it. So that would be the minor. And then of course you have a similar kind of breakdown for major. It's going to be a bit more of a planning and engineering fee. And then you have an application fee wrapped up into that base fee of $2,138. And then from there it can go up if you need fire marshal review, if you trigger SEPA, which is in a critical area review, if you have critical areas on your parcel. And of course, more time spent on the review, it can go up from there. So that's kind of a range for both.
All right. And as we mentioned a little earlier, we now require a pre-application conference for all major home businesses. And a pre-application conference is really a good opportunity for the applicant to sit down with staff and go over the requirements that will happen for a major home business. And it's really kind of helpful because we have not only the planner at the conference, but we'll have at least one engineer. If there are environmentally sensitive areas, like you mentioned, Marion, there'll be a biologist at the conference. Fire marshal typically attends the conference. So this will be a good opportunity for the applicant to get feedback from staff. We can discuss the permitting requirements with them. And yeah, try to flush out any main issues that might become an issue for the applicant, and just generally help the applicant get through the review process.
Yep, and we wanted to also include the cost for that. So $2,935 is the cost for any pre-application conference, and that there's no range. That's just the base fee, and that covers, you know, the engineering, the planning, the fire marshal, all the different review groups that need to be involved. That's what that's covering.
All right. Now, this next slide is we've determined what type of review it's going to be, and now what do? You have to submit. All land use applications have to be submitted through our LMS system. And this first link up on top is a step-by-step instruction about how to submit really all applications. But it's really quite helpful because not only do we go through the step-by-step instructions about how to submit, we also have contact information that if you get stuck, which is bound to happen for some people. So you'll see that Planning Apps email. If you get stuck, you need additional assistance, then you can reach out to there. And a very helpful planning tech, like either Jonathan or Holly, will get back to you and help you with your questions so you can then go ahead and submit that. If you have any building permit questions, if there are associated building permits that are required with the home business, you can contact Permit Services at clark.wa.gov, and they can help you with questions like that. Now, you need an LMS account in order to upload and submit your application.
Perfect. So if you're doing a minor home business and you don't have to do a pre-application conference, you're going to start with submitting an OLR case, which is an other land use review. That's just the case type that a home business falls into. So this document's really helpful because it breaks it down. So under A1, you can see there it talks through once you create your LMS account, you're going to email your application form, which is linked in here, to the planning apps at clark.wa.gov email. Staff will create your case for you, and then they'll get back to you. They'll send you your case number, your fee sheet, and the application summary, and then you can go in and upload your application items. We'll talk more about those on the coming slides, but once you get those submitted, you'll notify them at the Planning Apps inbox again, and then your case will be routed for the completeness check. If it's a major home business and you're starting with the pre-application conference, then you won't start with your OLR case. You'll start with a PAC case, which is the pre-application conference, so that's B there, which is a little bit different. So you'll create your own case in the LMS portal once you have your LMS account. You'll create that case, you'll upload your checklist items and pay the fee, and then you'll email us at the Planning Apps inbox, and then your case will be routed for review. So it's a little bit different, but if you've been in touch with us throughout this process, we've likely sent you this document by now or told you where to find it on our website. It's super helpful with getting those initial first steps going.
Yeah, it is very helpful. Okay, so submittal requirements for a minor home business versus a major home business. You will see some duplicate requirements in both, but let's start with the minor first. You have basic information like the application fee, form. There's also an applicant agreement form. Essentially, the applicant has to go through and initial items that they're meeting certain requirements or that they're making certain commitments that are required for home business. You know, one of the items, of course, is you live on the site, and you'll go through that, and basically it's making commitments that will be, that will be identified in the staff report and be contingent upon the approval. We also require a plan, narrative. There's a questionnaire narrative, and there are also associated applications that could be required for a home business. Like one of those could be a geohazard review. Floor plan is also very important for home businesses, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, and also a private road neighborhood agreement. Now, for a major home business, there are a couple of differences. The first, of course, something we've already been over, is a pre-application conference is required for a major home business. And you have to submit that final report as part of your application submittal. Same application form, application fee also required for a major. Another difference is a GIS packet, which is really very helpful for us It gives information about what districts you're in. Are there any environmentally sensitive areas on the site? Are you on a private road, a public road? That does matter. We'll get into that in a minute. Also, similar things like for the minor, a plan, a narrative, associated applications, and of course the floor plan. Now, this next slide is an example of the private road neighborhood agreement. If your site for your home business, if you live on a private road, then you need to get signatures from your neighbors that are on the private road. If you can't, then you will not be able to qualify as a type 1. We noticed that that was under the type 1 review requirements. If you cannot get the neighborhood agreement and signatures from your neighbors, then it'll be a type 2 home business and you will not qualify as a type 1. The next is a plan. And again, I know a lot of things are important, but the plan is very important because as Marion mentioned earlier, we have activity centers. If you have a rural major home business, all of the outdoor storage, all of the outdoor components of your home business has to be contained within an activity area. And as you can see on this plan, they're showing a 1,715 square foot activity area. Now, activity areas have to be screened with an L3 buffer on all sides. Now, an L3 buffer is basically a 6 foot high, tight screen shrub. Arborvitaes are one of the things that could qualify as an L3 screen. And if you notice on this plan, you'll notice to the west and to the east, the applicant is, on this plan, they're showing screen trees and buffers, which would help screen that activity area. But if I were to review this, the first thing I would notice is that there may not be adequate screening to the north of the activity area because we do have to screen it from the public road, Northeast Bradford Road, and so we might require some additional screening along the north of the activity area just to make sure that it does comply with those screening requirements.
All right, so I will talk about the applicant agreement form that Richard had touched on before, and I'll kind of toggle between this one and the questionnaire narrative because they're kind of similar. The applicant agreement form is required for both minor or major, and it's just a series of statements that you'll go through and you'll initial. So I am the owner and operator of the home business. My home business will not occupy more than this much of the dwelling. So you just go through and you'll initial and you'll sign it and you'll date it. That's the applicant agreement form. And then the questionnaire narrative, this is just for the minor home business. And it's similar, but instead of just initialing, you'll go through and you'll fill in the information. So, I will be using this much square footage of the dwelling. I will be using this much of an accessory structure. So you'll go through and you'll fill this out and you'll sign it and you'll date it. And these are important because, as he mentioned, these are the commitments and statements that you're making about your business, and your approval is contingent upon these statements that you're committing to.
All right. The next slide is just an example of a project narrative. Project narratives are very helpful to staff because we're looking for the applicant to discuss some of the things that Marion just mentioned, your maximum allowance for square footage, whether it's the main home or an accessory structure, how many customers a day do you expect to have, those sort of situations. We hope that you're going to have all that information in a narrative, and we'll look at that narrative. When we do the complete check, we'll go through the narrative to make sure that it has all the information that we need.
Yeah, and we'll also make sure that it matches your other documents. So some of it might seem repetitive, but we have to go through and just make sure it all coincides and matches. And then so if there's any, inconsistencies, that would be one of the things that we would come back and not fully complete and be like, hey, it says this on this document, but it says this over here. So those are just kind of some of the things that we work through during that initial fully complete review.
All right, and this is an example of a floor plan. And kind of similar to what Marion was talking about, the applicant checklist form where they're initialing those items, we look at the floor plan to make sure that that they're keeping within the limits of the 1,000 square feet or 25% of the home, whichever is less, and also how much you're allowed to use for an accessory structure. So that's why the floor plan is helpful, because they'll put the square footages on there and we'll be able to verify that those standards are met.
Yes, exactly. And you can actually a lot of times find a copy of a floor plan for existing buildings in the Property Information Center on our website. And it's not going to be exact and it's not going to be to scale. And that's actually what this applicant did here. They were able to print out their floor plan from the building tab in the Property Information Center for their parcel. And they just went through and added some detail. Added some dimensions and labeled the rooms by use. And that's really all we need. It doesn't have to be perfect or to scale.
Yeah, great. Okay, so you've submitted all the documents to LMS, and now what's going on? Well, this is part of the review process in both in the minor and the major home businesses. If there is any items that are missing, or if there are some additional items that may be required, this could slow down the review or put a hold on the review.
Yeah, perfect. So obviously you have that fully complete review for both minor and major. So that can extend the deadline. It'll be a new 14-day review period if you get it not fully complete and have to resubmit, because of course staff has to have time to review your resubmittal. Once you're deemed fully complete for the minor, you move towards the 21-day review to approval. So if we need anything in that point, we'll just reach out via email typically. If you can get it to us pretty quickly, it won't be a big deal. If it ends up being an issue where maybe you can't get it right away, we might have to place a hold, but we do try to avoid that as much as possible. With major, it's the same idea, but again, like Richard was mentioning, we have that extra early issues review to kind of help that process along so that we don't come up with major issues at the end and have to place a hold, when we're nearing the staff report approval deadline.
And this slide is just the fully complete determination, as we have talked about, and the fully complete determination letter is important because it does give you the date of the fully complete, which of course officially starts that timeline, whether it's the 21-day for the minor or the 78-day for the major, and that's where that begins.
Yeah, so you'll get this email, and a lot of times it can be misleading because you'll be like, yay, we got our fully complete, now we're approved, right? Not necessarily. This is just us saying, like, yes, we have everything that we need to do the review. This is not your approval, but it's a good step in the right direction. So definitely good news, but we're not done yet. Now what?
Now we're going through the review process, and staff is diligently working on your review.
Perfect. And now, yay!
It's
now
approved.
you're going to get an email with your staff report from staff. This is your approval.
And yeah, this document is also very helpful because not only does it have the conditions of approval, which are important, but it also has the findings that staff got to get to the approval point. And if you'll notice on this decision, you'll notice the first couple findings would typically are the land use, some of the same stuff that we've been talking about. What are the requirements? What are the limits for home business, accessory structure, main home, customers a day, that kind of thing. But it also goes on to other important findings as well. There's transportation findings. We have geohazard, as we talked about, a geohazard review could be one of those associated applications. And we'll have findings about the geohazard review, fire marshal, and as others too, as we'll see as we get further along on this. Parking, public health. And public health is usually very important as well, depending on what type of home business you're going to have. But most importantly, of course, is the conditions of approval. We have the approval stamp and the conditions of approval because you have to comply with those conditions. Some of the conditions you have to comply with as you're setting up your home business, and some of them are more ongoing conditions that you have to continually comply with.
Yep, perfect. So now that you have your approval, you have your conditions, now what? So now you can move forward in the process. You've got your land use approval, but in those conditions, there might be requirements for obtaining a building permit. The fire marshal might have their own conditions that they've placed. Again, like he mentioned, public health, water and sewer. So you're going to have certain things that you're going to have to take care of now that you have your land use approval. There could also be additional state licensing, just depending on what your business is.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty important too, because I think when I talk to customers on the phone, a lot of times they lose sight of the fact, oh, I got my permit from the county, I'm going to start my home business. Well, what they don't realize is most home businesses do require state licensing. And so that's something that we like to remind people of.
Perfect. And so that's it. We wanted to include some helpful links where we got this information. Of course, there's handouts here in person. They're also found on our website, and we wanted to include our email address. We can help you through the process. Just email us, landuse@clark.wa.gov, and these are our resources from the presentation. So that's it. Thank you, guys. We're here for any questions. Ooh, April is first.
Yep.
I have 4 questions.
Oh,
All right.
hey.
All right, good.
Goodness.
Okay, so on page 1 of your presentation, it said home businesses need, if like you will need a home business if you meet these. Do I have to meet all of those or just one of them?
Nope, those are just letting you know if you do any of these things, you might need a permit. So contact us, we'll let you know. Those
I don't
could
have to
be
hit
triggers.
all of those. If I just use an accessory structure, I need a home business
Yeah.
permit.
It could be, yes, yeah.
If I live on site, but so I own the property, can I rent the house for living on the site? Or does it have to be me that lives on site?
It could be a renter, but they have to live on the site. So whether it's the owner or the renter, they have to, if whoever's home business it is, has to live on the site.
Got it. When you were giving the example on page 5 about the barber shop on the property, but a barber shop is permittable in the underlying zone, if I lived on site and it's permittable underlying, I have to permit it, I just permit it differently,
Correct.
not as a home business.
Yeah, and it's a more involved permitting process, because if you want to have an official barber shop, right, that doesn't have the limits of 6 customers a day, and you have to go through a full site plan, pre-application, site plan review, and then final review, which is certainly more an in-depth review than the home business.
What is that permit called?
The
Not a home business, but for the
site plan review process.
Okay, got it. And then you said I could reach out to those, you gave links of emails to reach out to. How long does it take for someone to answer the questions? When I email a question to land use?
We try to get back within 24 hours, so you can definitely plan on that.
And I think we're very successful at getting back at 24 hours. In fact, I think a lot of times we get back less
Much
than
quicker.
24 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
And is there anything I can do when asking a question that makes that even easier, makes answering it faster and easier? So I guess that's 5 questions.
Give us your
then.
address or parcel number,
Yeah.
please.
I know, even though it's on the recording, you'd be surprised how many people don't give their address or phone
Yes,
number.
that's a good place to start.
And a detailed question. A lot of times people will just mention their site or whatever, and we want the detailed question, because sometimes we have to do some research, right?
And we might come back with more questions, so just be prepared, to hear back
Yeah,
from
yeah,
staff.
exactly.
And just as long as you can answer what we ask, that's going to help us tremendously.
Thank you.
Megan?
Hi, guys. Great presentation. Quick question. On the rural major home business, the activity area, on the mapping, there's one area specifically mapped. Can that square footage be broken up into multiple areas on a property?
Very good question. We've had this come up recently, and we've determined the answer to that is no. Because, if you look at the code, it says activity area, singular.
Yeah.
So it's funny, that came up recently where somebody tried to break up their activity area. And in some ways it just doesn't make sense, because you have to screen it. That means you have 2 areas to screen, and especially if you have vehicles or equipment. And you have to remember, 2% isn't that large.
Right.
If you have 20 acres, maybe, but when you have these 5-10 acre parcels, it's not that much.
Mm-hmm. Good questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other ones? Mhm. All right. Well,
All right.
I guess that's it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I guess I'll just leave that up.
Yeah.